Yeah, we're live. As you can see, I am back from my trip to go see Brian Tooley and all the guys out there. Shout out to Brian and Kelly, who are awesome, and also to the other guys that are working on dyno. Brandon, who did the head porting, which was awesome to meet Brandon and his little golden retriever puppy Coleman, which we got to play with. He was a shop dog. It was awesome. I have two golden retrievers here, so we all fit right in. It was awesome. Also, James Short did the tuning. That was great. And Caleb, as you can see from the lead photo in the video, you can see that he has an S10 swapped with a turbo EcoTech motor. So we can get into that a little bit because obviously I got to go for a ride in that, which was awesome. You know, an EcoTech is super cool. So he has also had an LS swap in that thing. So he's mixed it around a little bit. And when he started talking to me about this 4-cylinder swap with a turbo, I'm like, dude, that's my jams, man. I'm all in. I want to see it. So I'm definitely going to do a video coming up on that. He plans to take it to the dyno. So we'll get into that stuff. All that's good. Karen's here. Bill's here. What's up, guys? Have a good Saturday night. Hopefully, I just got back from dinner with my lovely wife, Lisa, and my boys. And it's very exciting because my oldest son is learning how to drive. So he got to drive the truck tonight, which was all very cool. It was a good Saturday night. It was a great trip back to see the guys at BTR. We got to do some very, very cool stuff. So I finally got to do the test that I've wanted to do for a really long time, and that video is coming up. And that's to compare. Lots of guys want to see, well, what happens if I run stock 862 or 706 heads? What happens if I put big valves in them? By the way, the gentleman who sent me the big valve heads, please raise your hand, send me an email, send me a message, give me a phone call. I'm looking back to find all of your stuff, but I'm trying to finish up the video that we did, and I want to make sure that I direct people to you and the service that you did on these heads. So we did the big valve heads, we did stock ones, the big valve heads, we did ported chambers, and then we did basically a home porting after we did the chambers on the 862 heads, but they retained the stock valve sizes. We also ran a set of 243 heads, which were very cool. And all of the guys that have been this whole time yelling and screaming about the 243 heads being the best head ever made, maybe you guys were right. So we got that coming up, which is really cool. So that was a lot of testing. And again, thanks to Brian and to Brandon and James for doing all the tuning. And Brian and Brandon did all of the in-between porting. Like we would take the heads off and these guys would literally just go at it. And, you know, there's nobody better than you want both. For those of you guys not familiar, Brian Tooley owned Total Engine Airflow. And Brandon worked for him back in the day and is really, really good at what he does. So, but what we wanted to make sure when we did this porting, you might have saw, if you guys follow me on Instagram, you might have saw some of the stuff that I posted there where we weren't doing a valve job so much as we were doing just, you know, we were putting lapping compound just to make sure that it sealed properly. It didn't do anything to really change the valve job. We did not change the valve job. A valve job is another thing that would have been cool to test as well, because it's very important to have the right valve job. But since this is junkyard stuff, a lot of guys don't do that. Some of them maybe would try to do it themselves or send it in, have it done. But this is like the down and dirty stuff. So we just did the quickie Richard razor blade rebuild. We just, you know, scraped it, put a little bit of lapping compound on it, use a drill, spin the thing back and forth in both directions, and make sure that they had a good pattern on it, which they all did. You know, that again, that's not the same as a valve job. We didn't have the angles that we needed. And obviously Brian and Brandon wanted to do all that stuff coming from the Total Engine Airflow background because they want to do it right. And I had to keep telling them, no, we're not doing it right. And that's especially the case after we did the chamber work, and we did airflow and power changes to find out what that was worth. And then we did the porting, and I had to tell them, make sure, do not do full, you know, Total Engine Airflow style porting. And the interesting thing is that when talking to them, Brian and Brandon both said, we don't think that we've ever ported a set of these heads without doing all the other things. Like they always, like if you look at a stage 2 Total Engine Airflow head package, it always has a valve upgrade. So they would change that, and then they would obviously change the seat and change the bowl, and all the stuff would be tailored to work with all of that. And that's how they get the really big flow out of it, by making the whole thing different. And so they'd never change just the porting on the head, which is interesting. But we got to test all of that stuff. we also got to do a lot of really cool testing on an L83. So I have that stuff coming up. I posted one of the videos on the intake manifold, but we've got some other things coming up on how they made really big power out of an L83, what they had to do to the piston to get the necessary piston to valve clearance. They've got a lot of very cool camshafts, VVT camshafts. Even better, I know everybody's excited about that because they're actually able to run the VVT. They did that both on the L83, but also on a 6.2 liter. And the cool thing about that is it can be an LT1 or an L86 because that's the same motor. The only difference is the intake manifold. So if you put the L86 intake manifold on it, that 6.2 liter becomes, they share the same camshaft and cylinder heads and all that. So that becomes an L86. You put the LT1 intake manifold on it, the shorter deal, you know, more high RPM kind of thing. And there's lots of intake manifold testing on that, lots of camshafts. They've done ported heads. They've done, obviously, the Trinity manifold. And the other cool thing is while I was there, we had the 5.3 on the engine dyno. And so I asked Brian, I said, look, a lot of my guys are asking for, Julius is in the house, Tim's here, ProCharge Mopar, Robert Smith. The Atlas now has the Mark sent over the bell housing adapter so that we can make that run. So I just got back last night, as a matter of fact, from Kentucky. So we're gonna I'm gonna go down and we'll do the 4.2 as well. Where was I? Oh, the 5.3 liter. When I was there and I was leaving, I said, Brian, these guys want to know, because I've talked about the fact that it's not piston speed that limits RPM. Can we make this Junkyard 5.3 go to 8,000 or above? And he said, yeah, no problem at all. I said, so they have the Trinity intake manifold, which is a short runner, high RPM manifold. He's got the right camshaft for it. He's got the right valve springs for it. And we're putting a different set of heads on it so the thing will actually kind of make power. And it's a set of my 220 ASCAS trick flow heads. So they're putting that together and they're going to run that and let me know probably Monday or Tuesday of next week. And hopefully all of that is successful. So that will be really cool to see that thing buzz up there. Because this is, you know, they use these motors like I do. That 5.3, the Gen 4 5.3 was originally a VVT motor, has been used, you know, over and over and over again, like I do. I don't care about putting 200, 300, 400 pulls on it because it just keeps going. And it's a wrecking yard motor. And if you heard it, then you just go get another one. So lots and lots of cool stuff. And then also, so we got the ECOTEC, we got the 5.3, we got the L83, the L86, the LT1. The other thing that we did that I'm doing a video on is, what do you guys think? Do you think that we can run, do you think we can run one of these LS motors on Moonshine? There's a company that's local called Bardstown Bourbon. And is that, I think that's it. Bardstown Bourbon Company. I think that's the name of it. I just want to verify that. Anyway, they got us some, what is essentially Moonshine. And we're wondering if the thing could run, if the motor would run on it. So we did a little, you know, step into Mr. Wizard's laboratory. We did a little experiment to find out if the motor would actually run. And we know it'll run on gas. We know it'll run on E85. And how far removed is, you know, I think that theirs was 150 or 160 proof Moonshine. But it does have water in it and not gasoline in it. So the cool thing is, what do you guys think? Do you think it will run on that? So that's another cool, like, scientific experiment that we did. Plus, we get to play with Moonshine, which is awesome. So let me know what you guys got going on. All of that stuff. The ECOTEC's cool. It has a whole set turbo on it. It has an air-to-air. You know, it's the way that the average guy would do it. Like, for instance, and I have a bunch of photos of this, but like the air-to-air was originally had the inlets and the outlets were, you know, kind of on the side of the tanks, but he just capped those and moved them so that they were aiming into the engine compartment, which is easy to do. He also did some very cool stuff. That's Caleb that owns that from BTR, and he's an awesome guy too. Does a lot of cool stuff for them. If you take a look at some of the photos once I do the video, he's made some, he's 3D printed a bunch of plates that cover holes in the engine compartment where some of the wiring goes through and stuff. So he did a really nice job. But it's a whole set turbo, and I can't remember. Honestly, he's going to send me over all the specs on it, so we'll have all of that stuff after he runs it on the chassis dyno. Right now, it's got a it has an internal wastegate, which, as any of you that have ever run lots and lots of power know, that it can become problematic. It's one of the things that we ran into when we were trying to do the SVO turbo stuff way back in the day, is we even tried porting out the opening of the wastegate. But you get to a point where an internal wastegate, the orifice is just not big enough to evacuate the exhaust to slow the turbo down, and then you end up, we end up not having very good boost control. So he's working on that, but as soon as he gets that done, the motor is a 2.4 liter EcoTech. It has VVT, so it's got, and it runs on E85. So and he's made his own fuel system with double or triple in the tank pumps, but they're in a surge tank in the back of the truck. It's like, it's got a lot of like really cool stuff. It's a standalone on it, so it's pretty cool. So let's see what you guys got going on. So Rick said at a 1.6 Lysol with 2-liter non-VVT head, comp cam, 76 millimeter throttle body, running 20 pounds. It made 430. Did it make 430 wheel horsepower, Rick? That's good power. I know, 292. We need to get the 292 done. That's for sure. I have a turbo swapped LSJ 2-liter EcoTech and my 06 Cobalt stock motor around 430 wheel horsepower, 22 PSI. Biggest factor is the factory PCM is terrible. Yeah, he swapped that over, so he's got a nice ECU, and I need to figure out which one it is. I can't remember. I have all the photos for it. There was so much stuff that we were trying to get done when we were there. Julius, what's up? Jeremy wants to know, have you ever thought about doing a video tuning with a software that you guys use? Jeremy, I normally do Fast and Holly, and so I can show you what I do. James is really good. James Short, if you guys haven't heard of him, if you're in the LS community, you probably have. He's really good. He did a lot of stuff on the he does the Gen 5 stuff. He does tuning like in the car, so where it's important, and he also did the stuff on the engine dyno. So it's kind of good for me. I didn't have to do any of it. Yeah, I know James Williams run Everclear. I had a bunch of Everclear stories that I was telling Brian from way back in the day. We used to, because it wasn't legal in California, so we actually had to drive up when we were young. We'd have to, when we would go skiing up in the Sierras, we would go into Nevada, and you could just go into a liquor store right across the border, and then it was legal in Nevada. You could buy it, but that stuff's really, really strong. Ours was our Everclear was 190. Caramel apple moonshine makes the exhaust smell good. Yep. Yeah, Caleb, a moonshine run with LS would run in a car from back in the 30s. Yeah, so it'd be back in the day. It'd be like Junior Johnson, but with a modern drivetrain. Julius said, I wanted to clear up that the Aussie Cleveland heads are not just 2V closed chamber. There was a 2V open chamber, a 4V open chamber, a 4V closed chamber, all depend on year. So Julius, are those, but all of the open chamber and all of the 4V stuff that they use in Australia, those would all be comparable to the ones that are in the US, right? Because we never had that I know of, I don't think that we ever had a 2V closed chamber head, even on the early stuff, right? Riverside's in the house. John's here. Caleb. Squirrel guy's here too. Do you think reduced travel lifters are worth the cost? Normally, guys run short travel lifters on more racy stuff. We run standard travel lifters on a lot of our stuff. It's a 6,500 or 7,000 RPM motor. I wouldn't worry about it. If you're going to use short travel lifters, you got to make sure that you measure the push rod length. Exactly right. And the other thing with short travel lifters, given how close they are, you've got to make sure that you measure every one. You can't just measure one push rod and call it good. Sometimes there's variation, so you got to measure each one to make sure it's still in the sweet spot range. Is the turbo 4-banger Silverado engine responsive to mods? I'm sure it is, just like everything else, more boost, obviously. Do you think a 1050 Dominator 3 circuit is too big for a 6-liter with the LS3 heads and a giant cam for drag and nitrous? Steve, if you take a look at the LS3 intake test that I did, the Dominator style intake manifold made more power than the 4150 style intake manifold. We ran, this was a Super Victor, so it makes more power. And if we ran that, I think we ran that on a stroker, though we didn't run it on a 6-liter, but that intake makes more power. And so if you're going to add a bunch of nitrous, I would still stay with the Dominator one. You could put a smaller Dominator than a 1050 on there if you wanted. What's up? I'd like your opinion on 706 heads on an LS1 build I'm doing with a 222, 231. Those will work good. The 706 head will make more power than the 241 head that came on your LS1. Woodworth is on Uncle Tony's live all the time. John, is that true? The fire marshal bill of turbo engines. I love, imagine, watch this. My Moonshine adventure didn't work out very well. Matthew, we're going to run the 4200 very soon, and so we'll know how much power it has, what kind of potential it has. Yeah, the ECOTEC that I rode in was pretty sporty. Chevy ECOTEC is better than people are aware. It's a good motor. The one that I rode in was a 2.4, so already it's going to be, you know, better than a 2-liter because it's going to have more torque. So the turbo is going to be more responsive, and it has VVT, which should help it even more. I don't know about the head flow on the ECOTEC, but the thing was rated, I think, at 182 after looking it up. So there's plenty of potential there. ProCharge Mopar, if you're porting the 5.9 Magnum heads, let me know if you flow them and let me know where they flow. Boosted limits. What kind of power should I stick to with stock long block 5.3 with an F1C Pro charger? You can make 4-digit power with the stock short block. Will certainly take that. Turbo Diesel Dan, actually the 6-liter iron head is better than the 241 head. It won't make the same power only because it has lower compression, but it actually flows more than the LS1 head does. Richard, you're a tuning guru. That's Paul. That's that's not accurate. Would be cool to do an engine management test, Holly, Tech, Atomic, and others. What I think you'll see is the management system, if it will allow me to run the timing that I need to make power and the air fuel that I need to make power, they'll all make the same power. In that sort of simple equation, that's easy. Where those things show their strengths and weaknesses is more in how many channels they have and things that they'll control, and not usually like power is a very easy thing. If you have an NA LS and you run it at the temperature that we run it at, and you put it at 29 degrees, and you put the air fuel at 12.8, it's going to make peak power, and it will do that regardless of what management system you use. 2-liter Ford with a Cosworth head, that would be cool. Fly, any plans to test the newer GM 6.6-liter gas truck engine? I do. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Brian Tooley about that when we went back there because we were running the Gen 5 stuff, and I want to test one of those truck motors. I just don't know how prevalent it is. obviously guys are going to, the L83 is going to be probably the most common, and then the L86, and then that 6.6 would be the lowest production numbers, I would imagine. What do you think that the L83 will max out on stock internals? After looking at the rods, I think that the Gen 5 stuff has a lot of potential for power. The thing that limits the L83 is it has the least amount of piston to valve clearance. They've machined the pistons by, putting a cutting tool on it so that they can put more camshaft in it. But if you take a look at what they did, I've got a video coming out on the LT1 that they did, and that thing made like 670 with a cam and ported heads and an intake. So those are pretty impressive numbers, but I think that the L83 will take a lot of boost. The thing that we're working on now is whether we should run it as a direct injection motor with boost, or a port injection motor with boost, or a combination of the two. Yeah, James, the L83, we will max the stock fuel system easily, but we would have to put a lot more fuel in it, because I'm sure that it will go way past 1,000 horsepower. Montana's in the house. So, Julius, you and I are going to have to get on the phone. The 302 Cleveland head is different again. .4V style heads from the 80s. Okay. Julius, how does the 302C head compare to our Boss 302 head? Bad 406 Camaro. I actually have an L83, and I would be more than willing to do a big bang on that motor, as long as we can make sure that we get the right amount of fuel to it. Yeah, John, the 6.6 has a lot of strength in the bottom end, I think, and can make a lot of power. I don't know how that head, when I was back there, the guys from Brian Tooley Racing did a lot of cylinder head testing. They have airflow numbers, I think the L83 head, the LT1 head, the LT4 head, ported versions of the LT1 and the LT4 head. And I think that they have a GM Performance ported head as well that they sell, and I can't remember if that was a ported LT4 head or an LT1 head. I don't know, Marcus. He wants to see a comparison between the L8T, that 6.6, versus the Godzilla 7.3. And honestly, somebody having more displacement. I mean, it has a little more than 10% displacement added. That makes a difference for power. That's kind of like comparing a 5.3 to a 6.0. But I don't know how the internals are on the 7.3. So I don't know how strong they are. Maybe they're good. The thing that I like that I'm leaning towards on the L8T is that if it has a forged crank and forged rods, like you're saying, the rod is normally the thing that breaks. The piston doesn't normally break as long as we put ring gap in it. So if that's the case, and the heads are Gen 5 style heads, which a stock LT1 head flowed like 330, so it was a lot. And the good ones flowed 370. So that's enough to make a crazy amount of power. Vermont, what's up? Baby Shark GTO, thank you very much. But I'm back from Brian Tooley already, so it won't be till I go back. But I'm going to do some interviews with him via Zoom or some other form. Brian's a good guy. I love going back there and spending time with him and meeting Brandon and all the guys back there, and James and Caleb over on that side where the dyno is. Those guys are all really good guys, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. And they put up with me for the whole time. Half fast, the guy, he wants to see somebody modifying a factory intake to take injectors. Those guys did that. I don't know if they've run it yet, but they have done that. David, get back to work. Josh wants to see a big bang on the ECOTEC. Josh, you can get more than 400 out of the stock block. I don't know about the stock short block. I'll have to find out on this one what the internals are, whether or not they're stock. Tim's saying that the 7.3 also has a forged crank and good rods. They're powder metal rods, but that should be enough to be plenty strong enough. I don't know if anybody's ever pushed one of those. Sir Johnson, a 2.3 liter Ford with a turbo and a smaller car, like an Opel GT, would be awesome. I like those little cars. Building an LQ4 and don't want the wrong cam. Stock except 7.6 heads, maybe BTR stage 2 truck cam. Well, good street manners. The stage 2 truck cam is really good, Colin. That will work good on that 6-liter application. Now, after running VVT, especially on these Gen 5 stuff, now I want to have VVT on everything. And also, if anybody's wanting a brand new L83 crate motor, the guys at Brian Tooley Racing have a bunch of them. So if you're wanting one of those, you should contact them. Also, you can get their combinations, and I'm doing a video on it. With the, I think that the cam that they ran though had to have, I think it had to have a machined piston. I think it had to have valve relief, but they had one of their VVT cams in it and an intake, and it made, I'm thinking it made over 500. It made 513, I think. I'm putting an L61 with a TO4E and a Fiero. I like Fiero swap stuff. That's good. What do you think is the maximum horsepower for an aspirated 2.2? Well, the sky's the limit, and if you want to keep revving that thing and port the heck out of the head and do the intake manifold, but lots of camshaft in it, you won't hurt anything naturally aspirated on that motor. Do you have a chassis dyno at your shop? Steve, I don't have a shop. So the guys at West Tech have a chassis dyno and 2 engine dynos. On the L83, is it better to switch to port injection or turbo for turbo subs? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I know people will give you speculation, but I don't know. We're going to test that. What we're trying to do is be able to run it all port or all DI or a combination of those two to see what happens. The thing that I'm worried about on the Gen 5 motor is we can supply all of the fuel, but I'm worried about the piston design when we go to port injection. James, I don't know. The DI stuff is, those injectors are expensive. Brian, have you ever dynoed a turbo Chrysler 2.2 or 2.5? I'm hoping to in the very near future. Fly is talking about the charge cooling offered by port injection versus DI injection. And I've been told, and I don't know how accurate it is, we know that if you port inject it, that you'll have more charge cooling. But I'm told that direct injection offers charge cooling, but does it at the right time relative to piston position? I don't know. We'll have to see. That's why we want to test it. And we want to see which one makes more power. Brandon, I'm going to test the LS4 intake. I have one. I'm going to put it on something. Yeah, loud and proud. I was just talking about that. We're doing a port injection versus DI on the L83. Fly, the piston design's made for DI. It's designed to introduce mixture motion. Austin, I have done rotary stuff, but on the chassis dyno, not on the engine dyno. How much power can you get out of those 2.3 liter Fords? If you look at what Roush and those guys did, they made a ton of power. Personally, on the chassis dyno, we've done over 400, and I know that they'll do a lot more than that. That was just a kind of a stock motor with a cam and a turbo on it. An 88 Reliant with a 2.5 turbo stuff in it. Those are cool. 454 with 1 inch and 3/4 headers would be better on a 5.3 L83 or inch and 7/8. Honestly, I haven't done that back-to-back test to find out. What I can say is when we did test headers on the L83, which I have that video up, they didn't seem to change the power dramatically. So I'd like to do a comparison to find out. Yeah, James, $2,800 for DI injectors that flow more than the 30% more than the LT4 injector for $2,880. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Dawson, I've never done any porting on a flathead before. Solid cam and a 4-barrel 273 Mopar done right, 500 horsepower. I'd like to see a 273 that made 500 horsepower. Is a BTR stage 4 cam too big for a 5.3 with nitros? It depends on what how high you want to run the RPM on that thing. Daily, the single GT45 would be good for a B-headed 4.6 valve as long as you don't want to make more than 700 horsepower. Rye, we have run the twin Whipple chargers on the big block before. The guys at Westech customers have had those, and those are actually not designed to make lots of power. That was back when the Whipples were fairly small, but now they have blowers that are single blowers that are more than big enough to do whatever you need. Happy Anzac Day to you, Julius. What's up? Port the head on a flathead. Steve, there is a rule of thumb for heads on a V8. It's basically double the peak head flow. So if you got a 300 CFM head and you can make 2 horsepower per CFM, you can have a 600 horsepower motor, which takes a lot of stuff. It takes a lot of compression and the right intake and you know, a lot of stuff from the motor as well. And guys make more than that. I've seen guys make 2.2 out of that CFM on a V8. So that's a fairly good rule of thumb. Most of the combinations are under that. They're not taking advantage of everything that head has to offer in terms of the airflow. Andy, 406 TPI truck build. If you're running the stock tune port on a 406, it's going to make peak power really, really low. If all you care about is torque, then a roller cam is not going to get you much compared to a flat tappet cam. And heads would be at least a little bit important. You want a decent head on a 406, but ultimately the tune port is going to kind of limit you. Yeah, Steve, each point in compression will add 3 to 4% increase in power. From 8 to 1 to 12 to 1, beyond that range, the gains get to be less, and below that range, they get to be less. This head's for a built 6-liter. The 706 and the 862 are the same head, so I wouldn't pick either one of those. I would, if you are going to pick a stock head that will make the most power, it would be a rec port head. It would be a 823 or an 821. If you're going to pick a cathedral port head, it would be a 243 or a 799, and then lots and lots of aftermarket heads or ported versions of those heads would work really well too. Fly, I don't know how to control the trans and stuff. I don't do any of that programming. The 8-stack stuff works really good, but it's not the most powerful. It depends on the runner length of the stacks. When you did the Engine Masters episode, tuning up the tune-up, when you went from 31 degrees to 36 degrees, it only gained 6 horsepower. Would a big block Chevy have similar results, or could it gain more or less? It can gain more or less. It depends on what the head is. On a big block Chevy, a lot of times an iron big block Chevy head will want 40 or 41 degrees. So if we go from 31 to 36 degrees, we'll probably get a big gain on a motor that has a cylinder head that wants 40 degrees. If you have a motor that has a cylinder head because of the chamber design and the piston design that only wants 29 degrees, then you're not going to gain anything there. The only thing you're going to get is detonation. So all of the motors are not the same, but what you will see on all motors is you'll increase timing, which is why when I'm tuning, we start low and then start adding slowly 1 or 2 degrees at a time as we keep getting power gains. And then you'll start seeing diminished power gains as you go up. I went up the next 2 degrees of timing, only picked up 3 horsepower. And then the next 2 degrees, pick up no horsepower. And then the next 2 degrees, we'll actually start losing power. So when you start getting the diminishing gains, that's when it's time to stop adding timing. The difference between the 799 and 243, they're basically the same head. Boosted, I can't give you an hour or a date or, or a year number on how long a Mexico block will last, making 650 crank horsepower. I think you'd be able to make lots and lots of runs down the track like that. The LY6 is a good starting point. It's really good because it already has good heads. Take out the VVT, put a cam in it, and away you go. What's the best cam for my 4.8? It has 706 heads and best stall converter. It depends on what you're trying to do with it. You got to tell me how much power you want and what application you're running it in. Normally for 4.8s, I tell guys to run small cams in it. Rule of thumb for E85 timing, there isn't that. Because again, it depends on what your starting point was. If you're running E85 on a big block that wanted 40 degrees, you're going to run more timing than on a motor combination like an LS that only wanted 29 degrees to start with NA, because the amount of timing that you run under boost is going to be a function of the amount of timing that you ran NA. Yes, the Tim, the L33 53 has 799 heads on, as do a lot of Gen 4, 4.8, and 5.3s came with 799s on them. What are your thoughts on 463 valve motors on boost? How much horsepower will the stock block handle? The stock block will handle a lot. I don't know about the block won't be the problem. The rods and the pistons will be the problem. Andy, I think you could do a lot of good before you do a lot of bad on those peanut board heads. Uh, 6-liter with a BTR, if that's what it is, stage 2. If it's a stage 2 truck cam, you probably don't need a different converter in it. But if you do, don't go with something very big, then 23 or 2400 probably. You're trying to get 300 to the wheels in a 4.8, so you just need a camshaft then. And so you want to make 400 horsepower. You're gonna need a pretty good sized cam in a 4.8 to do that. I would put headers on it, and it's gonna have to to get 300 to the tire on a 4.8 is gonna take a camshaft, and it's probably gonna take a converter because you're probably gonna have enough camshaft in it that on a 4.8 that you need a converter. My LS3 stroker likes 27 degrees on 91 and 32 on 110. Okay. Yeah, we've run 1,000 horsepower with the mod motor block, so you won't hurt the block. The truck cam is a good choice, James. Oh, you weren't considering the truck cam. Matthew, I don't have a lot of experience with the 6.2 Ford. Banks, if you have a 274 cam in that big block with 119cc chamber heads, it's 9-1 and 38 degrees is going to be pretty close. Are there any 2V aluminum blocks? There's nothing stopping you from using an aluminum 4V block. Brian, I didn't do any, when I did the K-Series stuff, we ran everything on E85. I didn't do pump gas. I don't have any updates on the Nova right now. Why is it all the SUVs get all the cool motors like the Cadillac stuff too on the GM side? Patrick, you don't need to put 799 heads on your 4.8. That wouldn't be a good idea. If you have a BTR stage 2 cam, I would use a BTR stage 1 cam, but if you already have the cam, that's fine. 4.8 with a turbo, and you're trying to make 600 horsepower, that's easy. And a single turbo, you can get a cheap GT45 to do that. Kyle, a 330 Vortec 5.7 GM crate motor makes 225 wheel horsepower. The difference between net and gross horsepower is the net horsepower rating is like a factory rating is run the way that the motor is in the car, not at the wheels, but with everything hooked up. All of the accessories, all of the full exhaust, cats, everything. It's run at temperature. It's run with the factory tune. It's run with all the air intake system, all of that stuff, the way that it appears in the car. A gross rating is like if you're talking about a crate motor, they rate that and they'll tell you specifically, GM will tell you how they ran that to derive that power number. So maybe they ran it with a Holley 750 and an intake manifold and an electric water pump like we do on the engine dyno. They may have run it with headers. And so when you run them, when you actually test them under the same conditions on the chassis dyno, the numbers may be different. I have heard of the guys making the V12 LS stuff. That's kind of cool. No, it's AJ. It's not safe to say that you can add more timing with a 5.3 versus a 4.8. Guys will tell you that the stroke is going to affect that. So the dwell time is going to affect timing, which it will. You just have to figure out if you're trying to add timing, you just have to listen or watch for knot counts. And if you're going to try to put a lot more timing in, I definitely would do it with good fuel. I have an L33 5.3 with a 230 232. That's a big cam and a 5.3. Got lazy and didn't want to swap springs over to the stock 243, so I put on some hand-ported 241s, and it only made 325 wheel horsepower. That doesn't seem like very much for that camshaft, but when somebody says hand-ported, I just don't know how good they were. Andy says he's got a 9.5 to 149 with 118 cc chambers on a dyno at like 36 degrees best. And that's the thing. That's actually why I don't like providing people with timing numbers, because your timing may vary. The cc of the head is not the only thing. It's not the size is not the thing. The shape of the head also, it in comparison to the piston dome design, whether it's a flat top, how much what the quench looks like. There are a lot of things that can change. That being a 489 has a 42500 stroke. So a lot of things are going to affect it again, which is why we check and see how much timing it likes. James, if you are running a 98 C5 vet, 28 degrees of timing is about all that thing will want. An SHO Taurus motor would be cool. Yes, the traffic in California, especially Southern California, can get bad. Mason, I swapped a 6-liter, originally had a 5.3. The truck runs and idles good with a 5.3 tune. Could I mess something up driving it this way? Yes, and the reason that you'll mess something up is because you will go to wide open throttle if you're driving it around, because most people can't just drive it around and idle it around and do easy part throttle stuff until you get the thing right. Running whatever tune that factory ECU did was based on the displacement and power output of that combination and the injector size. Now, I don't know. I think that the 6-liter has a different injector size than the 5.3. It has different power output. So is that scaled exactly right? Do you have the right air fuel? I don't know about the timing curve changes between the 6-liter and the 5.3, but almost nobody I know can just drive the thing around easy without getting on the throttle, because I got to do it, why? Even though you don't know if it's tuned or not. So I would recommend not doing that unless you think that you have the patience to not get in the throttle. Favorite Star Trek. My favorite Star Trek character was 7 of 9. We need a super budget LS, 2 GT45, sloppy stage 2 cam, and all the boost. Andy, there's always more stuff to test. I haven't done nearly enough Gen 5 stuff. I haven't done the 4200. I haven't done the 3800. There's a lot of things left. Bob, a Kenny Bell will easily do that for track days. And I haven't done a North Star either. .3 there, Gen 3 stock connecting rods, estimated horsepower. Well, we did 1300 without any problem on the Gen 3 5.3 liter with a stock bottom end. Tim wants to veto the 4100 HT. Seven of 9 had it going on, that's for sure. I'm building a Turbo 5.3, planning using stock 862 heads, bought the Tech Stage 4 turbo cam from Texas Speed. That cam is not necessary on a 5.3. You can run it and it will make boost, but you can get, I don't know how much power you want to make. Maybe if you want to make 1500 horsepower, you need a really big cam in it. But if you're only going to make 1000 horsepower or less, you need a stage 1 or stage 2 cam. What happened to the GM 4.2 liter inline 6? It's still there. We're getting ready to test it. Yes, I agree. Jerry Ryan still looks great. If you're building a Harley for your next hot rod, make sure that it has a turbo. Aluminum rods on a 300 inline 6-cylinder? No. I won't put aluminum rods in anything. I say that and then then maybe it happens. Do you know how much gap on piston rings? We run 28 to 30 thousandths, and you're not going to leak oil. You're going to get blow by. Turbo Diesel Dan, I know the guys from the show shop ran blowers on those Yamahas. They ran Vortex on them because they ran so much RPM, so they worked fairly well. And I know that they were running them back in the day. I was in one that was going 10,000 with a blower on it, and it was making a lot of power. SRT4, I don't know how much different the the Mustang GT cam is to the truck cam, but if it is, it's not going to be a lot different, and I don't think you're going to lose anything. You're not going to lose anything down low. I haven't done any Brig stuff. I talked to Nick that does the drag racing junior dragster stuff, and trying to talk him into putting a turbo on one of those, which is really cool. Zach, the guys at Total Engine Airflow do a really good job on those 243s. Does having two different intake runners on a big block Chevy cause distribution issues? I'm sure you're talking about the long runner and the short runner, or the good runner and the bad runner on the big blocks. Judging by how much power we make with those things, that's not really doesn't seem to be too much of a concern. A 2016 5.3, most people's first engine mod is an air intake or a catback exhaust or a tune. Thoughts on using a smog pump to supercharge a go-kart? I was going to do a smog pump to supercharge my lawnmower engine, and kind of thought that was going to be cool. The smog pump is not going to be able to produce a lot of pressure because they're not designed to do that. And just check out the flow rate. The easy way to do it is get one of the electric ones and just see how well that works. That way you don't have to make the drive assembly for it. There's lots of good guys now that have programs for the 243 heads. The guys at let's see, West Coast Cylinder Head and Lingenfelter and Texas Speed probably has stuff. There's probably lots of guys that have good programs for them. The guys from K-Tech. James, that's what I was thinking. If you did an unlimited combination with a boost on a junior dragster, we're just not sure how well it's going to work. When running a turbo, do you need a big stall converter, and what's the best turbo size and brand? It depends on how much power you want and how much boost you can get down at that stall speed. What happens if you have a responsive turbo and you have, let's say, a 2500 stall speed? That 2500 stall speed is normally based on some sort of NA combination. Well, now if all of a sudden you add 100 or 200 foot-pounds of torque at that RPM, or down in that RPM range, all of a sudden that's going to be a much higher stall speed. It's going to artificially increase the stall speed of the converter from having more torque. Jordan, I have run the ASA cam that came in one of the crate motors. It was the 525 horse GM performance crate motor from Finnegan's, and it worked really well. We ran it with a high ram naturally aspirated, because that's what he had on there with 2 carburetors, and then we also ran it with boost, and it worked fine. I've never tested an electric turbo. Guys are running the junior dragsters with nitrous and nitromethane also, but I haven't seen any that were running turbos yet. I don't follow that a great deal. I know Nick really well, and so I was talking to him about it, just wanting to run boost because it's an engine or motor. There is a difference, and we wanted to run boost on one. Can you make more power on a stock PI 2 valve with just an intake without a tune? I hear it's just dress up and sound. Are you talking about an air intake, or are you talking about an intake manifold? An air intake probably will make more, but I think you're going to have to tune it, because you're going to change the position of the mass air meter. Tim, I've never compared the ASA cam and the LT4 hot cam. Have you ever seen EcoTech drag engines make poles? Yeah, they make a lot more than 1,000 horsepower. Back in the day when GM was with their EcoTech program into the import drag racing scene, they were probably closer to 1,500. What does a chassis dyno and tune typically cost for an LS car? I don't know. That's going to depend on what the shop is. A legitimate electric turbo. Here's the problem with electric turbos and superchargers is that if you calculate the amount of airflow to make the kind of power gains that you want. So for instance, if you if you take a Kong 2650 supercharger and you run it at its maximum RPM and its essentially maximum flow rate, you're talking about it takes almost 300 horsepower to drive that blower to do that, to flow that amount of air. So if you think about what an electric motor, a 300 horsepower electric motor is to spin a supercharger like that, and I know that that's an extreme example. We wouldn't be looking at something that wants to make 1,000 or 1,100 horsepower of the tires. But if you look at, you know, even a 50 horsepower or 100 horsepower electric motor is a huge thing to be able to turn something like that. You're not going to be able to do that with these tiny little electric motors. A 3,400 stall seems like a lot unless you're on a turbo LS, unless you're running a, are you running a lot of engine speed? Are you running 8,000 RPM engine speed? I like the guys at Donut Media. I watch their stuff a lot. I have heard about air going supersonic, and it's, you can calculate that if you know what the airflow is, and then the you can calculate it based on the size. So Rick says he charges 700 depending on whether it's a Gen 3 or Gen 4 to tune the turbo LS. Nathan says Engine Master's octane dyno numbers were interesting. There's no change in power with the octane difference, and I've seen that. We've run that test a number of times, and I haven't seen a change in power. If the extra octane will allow you to add timing, and then you can take advantage of that. Like for instance, let me give you an example. And I was talking to James Smart. No, not James. James Short. sorry about that, James. Out, and I talked to Eric at West Tech about this too. Is when we run an LS, for instance, on the engine dyno, I'm running it fairly cold, let's say 150 degrees, and it has cold air going to it, so it has kind of the best of both worlds. We can run full timing, which is around 29 or 30 degrees, on the engine dyno on 91 octane on the engine dyno. And if I go to 30 or 31 degrees, it doesn't detonate, but it doesn't make any more power. So we know that that's the maximum amount of timing that it wants. When guys run them and tune them, James or Eric or somebody, when they tune them on a chassis dyno, and the motor's in the car and doesn't have all of that cold air and has a hotter water temperature, 180, 190, 200 degrees, it will be a lot more detonation sensitive. So you can't run 29 degrees, even though that's where the motor makes peak power. You can't run 29 degrees a lot of times in the car. So you have to detune it. That's where extra octane would definitely come into play. Like if you run E85 in it on an NA motor, which when we've tested it doesn't make a lot of power, but if you run E85 in it and you can now put the timing in it where it wants to make power, you're going to pick up power. But you're picking up power from the timing, and you're picking up power because the fuel octane allowed you to add the timing. But we don't normally have that problem on the engine dyno. When we run supercharged or turbocharged stuff with E85, we pick up power from the E85 all by itself without changing the timing. And then we can pick up more from the timing. So E85 is a kind of an interesting thing. What does it take to put a 2.2 Ecotec and an S10 turbo 4-cylinder that finally works? Caleb has done it, and his looks really nice. I'll put that video up so you guys will be able to see what all of the stuff that he used. Bob, no problem. I'm happy to do the 2-valve stuff, and Andrew does good stuff too. I've looked at his stuff. Spool and Sedan has a supercharged 2.4 and a big turbo 2-liter Ecotec. Tim, the octane by itself won't do anything in that case. On the chassis dyno, if you just change the octane and don't change the timing, we haven't seen any power. Have you talked about the 1.4 turbo? No, I was talking about a 2.4 Ecotec. And we have 2 more minutes. I'll tell you, I was really impressed by and we'll finish up here since it doesn't seem like we have a lot more questions. But when I was back at Brian Tooley Racing, the thing that impressed me about the Gen 5 stuff were the connecting rods. After taking a look at those, I mean, those things look super beefy. The pistons on the Gen 5 stuff, I'm not thrilled with, but that's fairly easy to change. But what I am impressed with is 2 other things on the Gen 5 stuff. One are the cylinder heads, which flow a ton. I mean, a stock LT1 cylinder head flows more than an LS3 does. And ported versions were in the 350, 360, 370 CFM range, which was really impressive. The 5.3 has a lot of cylinder head, so more than enough to do what we would want to do on a 5.3. And obviously, those are fairly prevalent and fairly popular. So I think that if we can get the fueling situation taken care of, then we can make a lot of power with that. And I really like, the other thing I like, in addition to the head flow and the connecting rods, I like the VVT. The guys at Brian Tooley Racing have done a ton of testing on VVT camshafts, and people are going to be very impressed with the stuff that they've done and how well these motors, the average power production of these motors now with the VVT cams, they're they got stuff that makes more than the factory cam by everywhere, even at the lowest RPM, and by a lot. So it's a pretty impressive combination. It didn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work, but a 5.3 and L83 5.3 is going to be a real impressive piece. So we'll find out how much power we can get from those NA, but more importantly, obviously for me, I hope we get this fueling situation solved so that we can run a bunch of boost on these, because as soon as we can, obviously I'm all in on doing the boost. And if we can do that without having to spend $2,500 on fuel injectors, that would be, it would be much better. I'm hoping that the port injection works. And the thing is, if we have to put, like on my particular motor, if we have to put a piston in it, I will, so that we can run lots of boost. But I would like to find out how much the stock bottom end would take before we go on to, doing some super powerful stuff with like forged rods and forged pistons. It's very, very cool. I want to thank all of you guys for showing up. I'll be back tomorrow, and then I should have some other videos up tomorrow as well. Thanks for showing up, guys. I will see you later.